Okay, for section 1.1, question E4, we're going into this question of whether or not there was age discrimination. And one way to look at that is by creating one of these tables. Then we later on could use a chi-squared test to actually test whether or not this is significant. But even with a basic table, we can get a sense of if something unusual is going on. So for part A, constructing a summary table, we're just basically tallying here. So first we need hourly laid off. And so hourly are going to be the H's. Thankfully they are grouped together here. And then we're looking at whether or not they were terminated. So we have in terms of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 who were not retained. So in other words, 10 were laid off, and you could go back and count that 4 were retained. Similarly, if we look at the salaried workers, we'll get 18 laid off, 18 retained. If you want to avoid a little bit of counting, we notice that there are 50 total. So whenever you're filling out a chart like this, these total columns have to equal the total of this row is right here, the total of this row is right here. This total is the total of these two, this total is the total of these two. So if we know the total number, it turns out we just need 3 out of these 4, and then we could fill in backwards. For example, if we didn't know this 18, but we knew that these two added up to 14, and we know that these two numbers added up to 50, we could subtract 50 minus 14 to get 36. And since these two entries have to equal 36, if this is 18, we can subtract to find out that this is also 18. Now this may seem a little bit silly just to save work. It turns out later on that this is an important concept called degrees of freedom, and it's something that allows us to calculate whether the difference was actually significant, which is why I am mentioning that right now. But for now, the main part is that you know that you get these 4 numbers from the chart, and then the rest are filled in by totaling up the numbers right here. Of course, if you wanted to find the number of hourly workers total, you could go back to the chart and count to find out that there are 14 if you didn't want to add these 2 numbers, or if you didn't know that you were allowed to do that. That would also be a correct way to handle it. So proportion of hourly workers who are laid off. In other words, we're looking at hourly workers. So we're looking at these 14 workers. 10 of these 14 were laid off. So what is that percentage? Well, we have 10 divided by 14, which would give us 71.4%. And do be careful whether they're looking for a proportion, which would be 0.714, or a percentage, which would be 71.4. So proportion, going from proportion to percent, we're just going to move the decimal 2 to the right. And going backwards, we'd move 2 to the left. Proportion of salaried workers who were laid off. So now we're looking at these 36 workers. 18 were laid off, so 18 over 36 is 0.5 or 50%. So looking at these two proportions, it does look like the hourly workers were more likely to be laid off. Now, of course, this is just kind of an estimate. We won't really know if this difference is significant until we get later in the course and get some statistical tools to be able to do that. But just by eyeballing it, I mean, there's a 21% higher chance of being laid off if you were hourly worker. So that does certainly seem like a difference in proportions.